Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the local sports break here on ESPN2. I'm Tad Kazaneski, your host, for what we hope will be a brand new, exciting show dealing with the sports in South Jersey and in the United States. And each week we're going to try and bring you a different guest from a different area of sports, whether it be in the media area or in the actual playing field, or some coaches we also have lined up here. And I thought it'd be kind of neat today to start off with a media guest. We have Phil Anastasia. He's a columnist with the Courier Post. Phil, thanks for joining us, first of all, and can you tell me how you got involved with newspaper reporting?
Well, I kind of followed in my brother's footsteps to get in the newspaper business. My brother, George, he's a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, covers organized crime, and he's written a couple books about the mafia. I consider him to be the famous journalist in our family, and he's about 10 years older than I am. So when I was still in school, he was involved in the newspaper business. So I had an interest in it from that standpoint, and I just always liked sports. I was a big sports nut growing up, playing sports, watching sports, following sports, and I always had a lot of interest in English. I was an English major in school. I liked reading and writing, so I was able to kind of put the two of them together and find a profession, you know, where I was able to put them two together, and it's been real fun for me.
Was the most important thing that you were an English major, that you get involved in something writing? Is that the most important thing for young kids out there, and maybe in high school right now, who say, boy, that sounds kind of interesting? What kind of advice would you give to young kids?
Yeah, it's funny, because when I talk to either journalism classes or just schools, general classes in school, I always talk to the kids about the importance of reading, and a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that I never took a journalism class in my life. I just, I was an English major, and I liked that idea, that standpoint of it, the reading and the writing, and I think if you want to be involved in any kind of the information field or anything like that, you really need to read, and I think that's probably a better background, at least from my standpoint, than any sort of journalism class you could take.
Now, how did you get your first break with the Courier Post?
Well, I was just kind of lucky. So many things in life are timing and just being at the right place at the right time. I was working part-time at the Courier while I was still at Relland College in the summers, just answering phones, softball scores getting called in, that kind of stuff. And I did that for about a year, just as a part-timer, a couple nights a week. And at the same time, the Courier was expanding to a Sunday newspaper at that time. And they were expanding just about every section of the paper, including sports, because as you know, the Sunday sports section is so large. And they just happened to have a couple openings, and I was kind of, like I said, in the right place at the right time, and I was able to get in full-time right after school.
Well, you mentioned your first job was to just sit there by the phone, take the scores. What did you think was going to happen when you got hired by the Courier? And were you disappointed at all when you were sitting there those late nights at the phone?
No, I wasn't disappointed. I mean, I just... I understood that I was starting out at the ground level, and that's where you start in the sports department. You start picking up the phone and taking scores that are called in and writing roundups and things like that before you get yourself to the level where you're going to have a byline and you're going to go out and cover something. So to me, it was very exciting just to be involved with it, and it was a real learning experience. And I think in any business that you're in, you need to have that foundation of how it works from the bottom up, and you need to start down there. And so for me, it was good to start down there.
How long did it take you from taking the scores on these night calls to actually going out and reporting on games?
About a year or so, I'd say. I don't remember exactly, but it seems. I know I was very excited when I finally got a byline, and it was like a big moment for me to finally write a story with my name on it. I don't exactly remember how long it took. But I know I spent a pretty significant amount of time just being a part-timer, just answering the phone, being a pretty anonymous person at the sports department, which is, a lot of people are there now who are in that situation, and I'm sure have aspirations of moving up the ladder.
And you talked about it. You didn't have any experience with journalism. Were you a little nervous about that at that point? Your background was in English as you went out to do this first game?
A little bit, I guess, but I guess maybe that was why it was a good situation for me to start sort of at the very bottom and sort of get a feel for how the department works and how newspapers work and how a sports department works. I certainly wasn't ready to go out and cover something right away, but after having been in the department for a long time as a part-timer, I certainly had some confidence at that point.
What we're going to do right now is we're going to take a short break. We will be back with more with Phil Anastasia, columnist for the Courier Post, right after this. Welcome back to Sports Card. Tad Kazaneski with you. My guest, Phil Anastasia, columnist for the Courier Post here in South Jersey. Now, Phil, you finally get to the game. Can you run through a typical day, we'll say, for example, in a basketball game? How do you prepare? What happens during the game?
Well, I think it's important in your preparation to kind of have a feel for where the two teams are at that point in the season. Have they been winning? Have they been losing? Who's been playing well? What's the situation with the coach? How long has he been there? Has he been through something like this before? So, usually you'll do some sort of reading on the team, either through the preseason forms that the coach send in or just some things that have been written about the team. Maybe talk to another reporter that has covered them recently, how they doing, who's playing well for them. Is it a surprise that they're winning or that they're losing or whatever? And then you just go to the game and get the two lineups from both teams. And what a reporter will do at the game is write down every play. If it's a basketball game, you're going to write down every basket and the time of every basket. And that enables you, when you go back, to kind of put together what was the ebb and flow of the game. How did the team break a game open? Clayton High might have broke the game open with a 10-0 run in the second quarter, and when you go back and look at your notes, you're going to be able to see that because you have every basket written down.
Now, how tough was that when you first got started? I'm sure coming into it, you were a fan, you were used to watching the game. How tough was it to go play by play, writing each thing down?
Well, it was different. I don't know if it was tough. It was funny. The first game I ever covered was a football game, Delsea at Clayton on a Friday night in early September. It was the first game of the year. And I remember it because it always seems like it was raining in night games at Clayton, anything I ever covered. And not knowing any better, I went down and I had a felt tip pen.
Oh, no.
And I was writing, and it was raining, and at halftime, everything I had written had run off the sheet. So I learned real fast to use ballpoint pens. But it's something you get used to, and it's just it really helps. It helps you, like I said, reconstruct the game when you're putting the story together, and also when you're interviewing people after the game, you kind of have a good feel for how the game went, and maybe you can ask some more pertinent questions.
How long do you think it went till you kind of mastered that process? Because that seems awful difficult to write down play for play.
Oh, I guess maybe a couple years. It's really not that difficult.
Really?
It's really not. It's more difficult in a fast-paced basketball game. Now football, there's a break between every play with the huddles and all, so it's really not hard at all. Baseball's pretty easy to do your play-by-play with. In fact, baseball you just do a scorebook, and you have a notebook with you to write down maybe some key plays. But it's not as hard as it sounds, and I think after you've done it for a while, it's pretty easy actually.
Now the game ends, and how do you go about approaching what side, what team? Do you approach a certain team first?
Well, I usually go in and talk to the winning coach and try to get his thoughts about what was the key points in the game or particular players that played well. Try to talk to a star or stars of the game with the winning team, and then usually try to talk to the losing coach too. I think it's important to try to quote as many people as possible. I know sometimes as journalists we kind of get caught up a little bit in what we have to say, but I think people at home really like to hear what the athletes and the coaches have to say about the particular game. So try to quote people as much as possible.
How tough is it writing for space? I know you're allotted a certain form of space. Do you just have that grained into your head now? You know how much you can write to fill the paper?
Well, now as a columnist, just about every column will be the same length. Okay. So I have a feel for how long a column usually will be. When you're doing game stories, you have to talk to the desk before you write it. That's the people that are laying the paper out, and get an idea from them exactly how long they want the story to be, because they have allotted a certain amount of space on the page for that story to go. So usually a game story will be about, 400 or 500 words. Columns that I write usually are about 900 or 1,000 words. So you usually have a little bit more space for a column as opposed to a game story.
So we kind of relived his reporting history. Phil right now is a columnist for the Courier Post. We'll take a break right now. We'll find out. Welcome back to the Sports Card. I'm Tad Kazaneski. Our guest this week, Phil Anastasia, columnist for the Courier Post. Now, how did you get into the transition from being the reporter to a columnist?
Well, I guess it was about 2 years ago or so, we decided to add a sports columnist to the Courier Post staff, which we hadn't had before. And I had been the Eagles beat writer for like 10 years before that. I guess it was about 10 years. And, I was fortunate enough to be named the columnist, and that's a different sort of job than a reporter. So I guess it's about 2 years we decided to add a columnist, and like I said, I was the one they added.
How is a columnist job different? Do you kind of have free reign to report on whatever you feel should be reported on?
Pretty much. The job is to express opinions and to take stands on issues and to comment on things. And it's interesting in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways it's difficult because when you express an opinion, there's always a chance that people are going to disagree with your opinion. And, you run into that a lot as a columnist. But, I mean, that's the job. I always compare it to, if you had a bunch of friends out, having a couple beers at a sports bar or something, I wouldn't be the guy pounding the bar saying, this is my opinion, this is what I think. But that's what my job is. That is what the columnist has to do. The columnist has to be the one who says, here's what I think, here's what my opinion is about this. He kind of has to be the loudmouth in the bar. That's not my personality as an individual, but that's what the job as a professional is to be. So you kind of have to express opinions, you have to take a point of view, you have to make a stand on things. But the good side of it is it really is a change of pace from covering one team or one sport. I get to cover all 4 professional sports in addition to the collegiate scene around here and the local scene also. So I pretty much have free reign to write about the entire sports scene around here. And there's so much going on with the pro teams in Philadelphia and with good college sports around here and with such a great scholastic scene in South Jersey that there's never a shortage of things to write about.
I noticed after your columns, the newspaper prints your office line number. If people have any comments or questions. Has there been a hot topic that you've written about that you've gotten a lot of feedback, either positive or negative?
Yeah, there's been a few things where I've gotten a lot of mail. One column or one incident in particular was sort of a hot button for a lot of people. There was an incident last year involving Camden Catholic and Camden High basketball that sort of affected a lot of people. I got a lot of faxes on that one. But for the most part, I mean, people are pretty reasoned about, expressing their opinion back to me. I mean, I as a columnist, my job is to express an opinion, so I certainly understand when someone wants to write me or call me and tell me that they think my opinion is, out of whack, because everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Maybe some of your strongest critics may be the managers or players. First, let's look at the managers and coaches of the individual teams. Have you ever had an incident where they may read your opinion, if you will, in the paper, and then they just kind of shut you off for the next couple of weeks?
I had a little bit of a problem with Rich Kotite at the end of his tenure. I guess it was sort of understandable, because when he started, I was a beat guy, so I didn't really express a whole lot of opinion, because the beat writers really are supposed to just cover the team. In the course of his tenure in Philadelphia, I became a columnist, and when things started going downhill, I, along with just about everybody else, was pretty critical of some of the stuff that was going on with the team. So our relationship kind of ended on a sour note, and I don't blame him for that. I mean, I was critical of him, but that was an incident of where I thought a pretty good relationship with him, but just by nature of what was happening with his team and how much pressure he was under, and my job was to sort of stand up and make some critical comments about a team that really was falling apart. Our relationship really went sour.
How tough does that make it on your job when you're having a bad relationship with the coach and you're having maybe some of the players as well? Does that really tax your job?
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst part about it, because I'm really not like a real confrontational person. I don't like to get in a lot of arguments, but like I said, the nature of the job is to express a lot of opinions and take a lot of stands and to be critical of people when professional people. Our position at the Courier is never to be critical of any high school kids or anything like that. But as far as the professionals that are making the money, you have to sometimes stand up and say they're not doing the job. And the coaches and managers are under a tremendous amount of pressure. It's really a highly scrutinized position. So in a lot of ways, they view the media as sort of an adversary. And I think with one of the things we talked about off camera was the advent of sports radio, WIP. I think it's really created a sort of an adversarial relationship between the media and the coaches, management, and even the players in professional sports, and that's just something you have to deal with. you really can't be friends with these guys to begin with, because as a journalist you're supposed to be objective, but it's even beyond that point now. I think it's really sort of we're sort of viewed as the enemy by a lot of those people.
Well, Phil brought up the topic of sports radio. What we'll do now is we'll take a short break. Welcome back to the Sports Card. Tad Kosneski with you. Our guest this week, Phil Anastasia, columnist for the Courier Post. Phil, before you went to the break, you had mentioned about sports radio and WIP in Philadelphia. How has that affected your job specifically?
Well, I think it's impacted it. I think that those guys, and it's funny for me to talk about it because sometimes I'm on there, so I kind of feel like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. But in a lot of ways, they've sort of blurred the line between journalism and entertainment, and they're not exactly journalists, but I think they're sort of viewed as journalists by a lot of the players and management and coaches and all. So they sort of I think they've sort of upped the stakes a little bit. They're very critical about everything that goes on, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean they just comment on everything that goes on, and I think in the mind of a lot of the players and coaches, when WIP is hot on a topic, it's sort of like the media is hot on that topic, and it's really, it's really not the case in a lot of times. I mean, WIP can be crazy about firing Jim Fregosi, which they have been in the past, and really a lot of the print journalists and a lot of the television journalists really haven't taken that approach. But I think the Phillies organization kind of gets a little bit in a bunker when that happens, and kind of says, "Oh, the media is trying to tear this guy down." So they're sort of they're another voice out there. They're out there 24 hours a day. They're kind of always commenting on sports and on local sports, and I just think they've kind of heightened the reality of the relationship between the media and the athletes, the players, and even gotten the fans involved. So it's sort of kind of raised the stakes for everybody.
As a fan, I really enjoy it. It's something that hey, we can learn some extra information we may not be able to read in the paper, or you get to hear opinions. Now, something that bothers me about WIP, I'm a Philadelphia sports fan. I like the format of the New York station, where they will bring on the players, they will bring on the coaches. In your opinion, why do you think WIP hasn't been able to do a format like that, where we hear more from the coaches, more from athletes?
Well, they've made a conscious decision to have a different format. I mean, their format really, I think, is guy entertainment. I think that's what it is. It's not journalism, and I don't mean that in to be critical of them, but they're not exactly journalists. They're not exactly entertainers. There's some sort of a mix in between, and they've made a conscious decision not to have guests and not to have players and not to have coaches, and it's been very successful for them. And when they look at their ratings, I think they feel pretty good about the approach that they've taken. But they've made the hosts the stars of the show as opposed to bringing in stars.
Do you feel there may be any, like you said, you are on the radio with these guys from time to time too. Do you feel there's any ill will between the reporters towards the radio guys?
Yeah, there's some jealousy on the part of print people towards the electronic people, and I think there's some pot shots taken from the electronic people towards the print people. So yeah, there's a little bit of a problem there. It's kind of interesting because a lot of those guys used to be sports writers from the Inquirer. So it's not like they don't know what print journalism is like. But I think a lot of them have left that field and certainly feel like they're more successful now, and tend to look down a little bit on some of the print journalists. Not all of them, but yeah, there's a little bit of a problem between the two sides.
We heard a lot over the summer about a Fregosi meeting where some things were said that shouldn't have been printed, and somebody made a wrong decision what to put in, and some wrong things were said. How tough is it for you, as you're sitting with a pro player or a coach, manager, etc., to find out what is on the record and what's off the record, or is it obvious to you?
Well, usually it's obvious. I mean, once in a while you run into an incident where it's not, and I think that this particular case that you're talking about, where Fregosi had made some comments he has a regular pre-game session with a lot of the media, and I guess he made a comment in that session that he believed was off the record and kind of made its way out, and that's where WIP kind of fills a void that maybe print journalism wouldn't. And once it got out in WIP, the print media and the television media kind of had to respond to it. But for the most part, it's pretty obvious what's on the record, off the record, and most of the professional athletes and professional coaches and all are pretty conscious of guarding any sort of controversial comments they want to make, and they won't make those kind of comments unless it's to a reporter that they really trust and have a good relationship with. So there's not a lot of incidents where you'll kind of stumble onto a controversial comment from a player, because with their agents talking to them in one ear and the team PR director talking to them in another ear, most of the players are pretty conscious about keeping things off the record.
Do you feel most of the pro players treat you fairly? As a fan, we hear a lot about these guys are overpaid, they're bums. How do they treat you professionally?
I think they treat me, most of us, fine professionally. I mean, I don't have any problems with them. I don't think they really, most of them, and it's hard to generalize, most of them don't enjoy dealing with the media. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think they view it as an adversarial kind of relationship. And a lot of them feel like, the media is too critical of them. But I think a lot, or not a lot, but some of them, especially the ones that are a little bit more on the ball, realize that, dealing with the media is just a part of their job, and if they go about it the right way, they can really present a good image of themselves to the public, and that really will work in their favor. And I think, a lot of the players that are unpopular with the fans have problems with the media, and they tend to blame it on the media. But I think that one of the, the media really is the conduit from a player to the fans, and if they're smart, and a lot of them are, they'll have good relationships with the media, and they'll kind of use that to present a good image of themselves to the fans, which will be helpful for them both in terms of their just popularity, and it'll help them financially too if they have a good image.
We're up against the break. We'll be back with more Phil Anastasia in a moment. Phil Anastasia. Phil, what were some of the biggest, most memorable events you've covered in your career?
Most exciting thing I ever covered was Villanova's drive to the national title in 1985. I'd covered that basketball team all year. No idea in the world they were going to win a national title, and it was a true Cinderella story. That was amazing. Most interesting thing I ever covered was the Fog Bowl in Chicago. Couldn't see from the press box. They let us go down on the sideline, and players would disappear into this milky, chalky kind of fog. That was the most interesting thing. That was something I'll always remember.
Well, Phil, thanks for sharing some time with us this morning. Best of luck the rest of your career.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, my pleasure.
Again, special thanks to Phil Anastasia, our guest next week, the Hit Doctor, Joe Barth Jr.